Hello, welcome to the Innovation and Diffusion podcast. I'm Riveda Gozan, a research economist at the Program on Innovation and Diffusion at LSE.
And my name's John Van Reenen. I'm the director of POID and also a professor here at LSE. And we're really delighted today to have my friend, my co-author, and absolutely brilliant economist, Philippe Aghion, who has kindly agreed to join us and talk a bit about his research and his background. So I've lost track of how many papers Philippe and I have written together, but it's always a joy. It's always an experience to work with Philippe. It's one of the things which has made my research life exciting over the years, and something which I always look forward to. So thank you, Philippe.
Oh, that's great. Overly generous, John, as usual, and it's a great honor to work with John because it's always in very good mood, and most of the time we end up in good journals. So that's very unusual to have both great fun and good outcomes. That's usually very infrequent.
How long have you known each other?
I've known each other, oh God, I tell you, almost 30, I would say 30 years.
30 years, wow.
Yeah, EBRD days, 32 years, I would say, 33 years, something like this.
Philippe always tells the same story of how he was so shocked when he first met me when I think I just finished my PhD, and I came to see him in the European Bank of Reconstruction Development, where he was chief economist there. And I had very long hair there, and he thought, "Who is this hippie? Who is this hippie coming in?"
You had to open the curtain. You had to take the hair and the part, to discover John's face.
You had long hair.
I had very long hair. Yeah, very long hair.
You should show us that picture sometime.
Well, maybe.
If we're lucky. Okay, so just to give our audience and to you as well, like some structure. So I generally ask our guests, how they decided to be an economist. And then, if they had a role model.
I could answer that. I could try. I mean, I don't promise any answer you like, but I could answer. I could go on this question.
Yeah. And then we will go into some research questions, and then I prepared some cheesy questions, and some of them are AI generated questions. So this is an experiment that I tried. Yeah. Okay. So maybe we can start with the first question. Like, what made you study economics, and like, were you interested in politics, economics, those kinds of topics? When you were a teenager.
In fact, what happened is I was into politics, kind of left-wing politics in my youth. So like many of us, post '68, I was a post '68 generation in France. And so I was very much involved in politics, being militant politique. And of course, people would talk about economics, and there would be counter-arguments by, representative of other parties or other movements. And always looked like to me like everybody seems to be right. You see what I mean? So it was hard to me to, how can I find out who is right and who is wrong? How can I tell apart, Mrs. X, Mrs. B? And so that's how I started to question myself. And in fact, for the past 45 years or whatever, I started in economics, really to study economics, but militantism, I started being a militant in 73, 74, and economics I did in 76, so it's kind of being almost 50 years. I've been questioning myself, and in fact, I've never stopped.
What was your perception of economists back in the days when you were more political in the 70s? I know for me also, coming from my father was probably was also a very left-wing socialist. And I had a lot of discussions with him, and then our perception of economists was very negative. Exactly. These guys are just very right-wing, and they're using economics as a cloak to an ideological cloak for their real interest. Was that also your feeling as well, or?
You had left-wing economists in France, in universities, and my first teachers were Marxist teachers, so I do not perceive all of them like that. But it's true that there was a bit this sense that they were a bit, on the other hand, I studied mathematics, and that helped me a lot because I wanted to go from mathematics to economics. If you were going from mathematics, you could not avoid Gerard Debreu, the Arrow-Debreu model, you see, and so on that. one side of me was very much political. The other side said, I have to make use of the math I learned in economics. So that started to discipline me. I think it was luck that I studied math, and I realized that there was something called mathematical economics. And so that's a bit where I came, the mixture of my political motivation. But on the other hand, I don't think it's true the world has changed. I would not, espouse the same ideas that I had, exactly the same view on economics. But that social mobility is something important, that, you should provide opportunities to all, that poverty is something, which we should avoid. That I always felt that, and I keep feeling that. So those kind of tenets, which were motivated me early on, I think remained. The world has changed, and the means to achieve them, I realized that. I believe much more that central planning would solve our problems, that, for example, I thought that, socialist systems, centrally planned, were much less prone to corruption. I got that wrong. We didn't know about agency problems at the time much, and so that we realized that was not right, and that the market system is the best system so far, and you can improve it, of course. And but the basic motivations are still there. It's true that poverty is something that revolts me. When I see someone or a child with a smart child without, that's something that John has worked a lot on, the lost Einstein's phenomenon that John has worked on. That's something that revolts me.
Yeah, but what made you specifically be interested in innovations and entrepreneurship? We can go into Schumpeter a bit, but I want to ask also something about your mom.
I knew my mom would come in. I knew. I anticipated my mom, not that early, but that's fine. It's true that my mom was an entrepreneur. She created a fashion house called Chloé, and and in fact she invented the concept of prêt-à-porter de luxe, so ready to wear, because in fact before, women would essentially, kind of wealthy women would essentially go to haute couture. They would have, specially made, tailored clothes for themselves. That was the haute couture. And my mother had the sense but there was a time where women would change clothes 5 times a day, essentially to please her husbands. And my mother had the view of a woman who is emancipated, and she works, and she should not have to change clothes many times. So she had a vision of women which was already, emancipation. So it's starting from there. But that's also because she was, my parents were in the progressist movement. So her view was that, you should have emancipation, and that's how she came up with this concept. So it's not just that she had a vision about women, that was very different from, especially when she arrived in Paris. She arrived from Egypt. In Egypt, women at the time, now in Egypt, it's much more austere the way women dress, but at the time they were, it was much more liberated. And when they arrived in Paris, if you can see how women used to dress in the post-war, it was extremely austere, extremely dull. And my mother thought, well, why don't I import, the joyfulness of Egypt and the cheerful, clothing, and so it was a mixture of this vision of the emancipation of women already back in '52, in the early '50s, which was really very much kind of prophetic. And also the thing that let me import, the way we dress in Egypt, this kind of light way and freedom, and import that. So France was a kind of very.
Feminist? Would you say your mother was a feminist?
I think she was deep down in her own way. She was, but she never theorized that, but she was a deep down a feminist. Yeah.
So then her ideas also affected her entrepreneurship, and that also had an effect on
I don't know, that was part, but one part also is that, as you know, Schumpeter, builds a lot on Marx. So I studied a lot Das Kapital. And one part of Das Kapital, the first part of Das Kapital is exploitation theory. That became incomplete contracts, which I've worked a lot on. That's one part of my research. Now we don't do with labor theory of value, we do it with incomplete contracts. The second part is more Leontiev, but that I didn't work much. And the third part is the precursor of Schumpeter, and Schumpeter himself acknowledges it. I mean, the notions of obsolescence. Alors, he missed, I think Marx missed the idea there, but obsolescence is already embryonic in part 3 of Das Kapital.
Explain it, Philippe, just go back. I think it'd be useful for the listeners, for the listeners, especially the non-economists, on just, in terms of book 1 of Das Kapital, the incomplete contracts idea is because a labour contract is incomplete by its notion.
Exactly. The thing is that the idea was that there is in Marx there is the notion of exchange value and use value for labor. So in a modern incomplete contract theory, Grossman-Hart typically, I have a firm, I have machines, and I hire you. I may hire you at ex ante. We are in a competitive market, so I hire you at your price. That's the exchange value of Marx. But once you're hired, we are in a bilateral monopoly. You are, and because I have the machines and you don't, there is a kind of hold-up problem, between you and me. And so ex post, once you are hired by me, we enter a bilateral monopoly relationship, and the bargaining power lies with me a lot because I have the machines. Because you see, if I fire you, maybe I may lose a little bit, but if you leave the firm, you may lose a lot because I have the physical capital and you don't. And so that's very much all that is part of the incomplete contract theory. You cannot write contract ex ante, specifying everything. So ownership rights matter, and so you enter in a relationship where ownership matters, and of course ownership determines who has bargaining power ex post, and that makes a big difference. And and so I could end up exploiting you because I have the machines, I have the bargaining power. Even though I hired you ex ante at the market price, I may get a lot from you ex post because you are in my hands, where you are employed by me, and I have the machines. I mean, that's very much.
And this is important because a lot of conventional economics, going back to the kind of the traditional view of economists, it leaves that power relationship out. So often we think about the markets and the competitive market, and in a competitive market, a worker does have a lot of influence. But once the worker is working in a firm, the tables are turned, and now it's all about power and authority. And
so a big part of my research is on power, authority, the incomplete contracts, and very much push that area. And the other part is on growth and innovation, and I realized that So first, I tell you, the influence was my experience of having seen innovators. My mother worked with creators like Karl Lagerfeld very much, was a big, well-known designer. So I've seen innovators, but at the same time, from my study of Marx, I was, part 3 was very important. And in fact, Schumpeter used to say himself, Marx is too good to be left to the Marxists.
I never heard that. That's a great.
You didn't know that?
That's a great expression.
And also, since we're talking about entrepreneurs, and since you also mentioned like Marx and Schumpeter, maybe we can continue with Schumpeter a bit. So you have a paper with Peter Howitt that was very influential and probably got really high number of citations, incredible number of citations. So can you tell us about what you saw in Schumpeter's work, and what you saw was missing, or what you wanted to do with how did it evolve, that idea?
First, I have to say I'm not at all an exegete of Schumpeter. I've barely read anything from Schumpeter. I have to confess that I've read very little. I've read much more Marx than Schumpeter. Schumpeter, I took one thing essentially: creative destruction. So it's a notion. And so what I thought was interesting with Schumpeter is that the idea that innovation is important and that you have something called creative destruction. And I took that and I said, I want to build a growth model that embodies this notion. So I've never tried to say, I want to model Schumpeter, period. No, I take that notion and I build a model with my co-author Peter Howitt to operationalize this notion and to see how far we can get from there. And so we build a model that would rely on. So when I was a student in growth economics, there was the Solow model, the neoclassical growth model, and where growth is driven by capital accumulation, but under reasonable assumptions of decreasing returns to capital accumulation. You increase production much less when you go from 9 machines to 10 machines than when you go from 0 machine to 1 machine. Okay, when you have that feature and that capital accumulation is the main engine of growth, at some moment you run out of steam and you can cannot grow forever just based on capital accumulation. You see, because at some moment, how much you get with more capital accumulation is more than swamped by the capital depreciation, and at some moment you stop growing. And Robert Solow saw that, and he said the only way you can get long-run growth is technical progress. But Robert Solow would not tell you where technical progress comes from. And so my sense when I was a student said, well, but there is this guy Schumpeter, so maybe there is the answer. But there was no model of Schumpeter. There was no of creative destruction. There was no empirics of creative destruction. So we did that from scratch. We started from scratch. And with Peter, we said we would like a model that with the three following ideas. One, long-run growth is driven by cumulative innovation, where each innovation improves upon previous innovations. You stand on the giant shoulders of your predecessors, okay, previous innovation. And second idea, innovations do not come from heaven. They are the result of entrepreneurial activities motivated by the prospect of innovation rents. When you innovate, you get a better product or a cheaper way to produce, which grants you temporary monopoly rents until someone else does better than you. So the second idea, innovation is a result of entrepreneurial activities. And third idea, creative destruction. Old innovation replaces new technologies. Why we thought that was interesting? Because at the heart of this, there is a contradiction. On the one hand, you need innovation rents to motivate innovation activities, R&D investment and the like. But on the other hand, yesterday's innovators are very tempted to use their rents to prevent subsequent innovations. Mm-hmm. And regulating capitalism is all about how you manage this contradiction. And we thought that was very interesting. You see what I mean? That's a huge gold mine, because you can do political economy of growth there, you see? Because growth is all about the conflict between the old and the new. And that's what we thought was not in the other models. And that's where that's where competition is important. That's where I got into this. But it was in fact a gold mine, because still to this day, I mean, we started working with Peter in we did our model in 87. So 87, it's been 36 years and a half. And we are still there working on this. Enfin, I'm still there working on these models. So it's a kind of intarissable. It's an inexhaustible source, spring.
And also, I mean, since we're talking about entrepreneurship, entrepreneurial activities, I mean, we can maybe start talking about history a bit, and then we can go into why some countries are lagging behind, and even though we observe like really high number of entrepreneurial activities. So if you look at, for instance, like in the past, you see China, or some even like in the Middle East or in other countries or in other areas, there are scientists, mathematicians, innovative people coming out, but we do not observe the same kind of the growth or the change in the economy as in Europe, like after the Industrial Revolution. So what are the institutions that played a role here?
There, I think the work of Joel Mokyr is very helpful. I think people like Joel Mokyr have thought about, and we talk about, and you invited Joel, voilà. You need cumulative innovations, you need to have innovation rents for innovators, and you need creative destruction. Okay, those are the three ingredients. In Europe, you had institutions that would make these three ingredients possible. Because first you had at least universities, you had institutions to make knowledge, and you had patents. When you have a patent, you have disclosure. So at least to some extent, that allows for cumulative innovation. So the combination of having universities and a society of science on the one hand, postage which would make possible to communicate, and the patent where you have to disclose. That made it possible to have the cumulative innovation process. Okay. Second thing I mentioned, but you need innovation rights. You needed property right protection. So in England, I think the Glorious Revolution was a key step in that direction, because before you would have kings that could expropriate everybody, and then at some moment you limit the power of the king. You did that with the Glorious Revolution. In France, it was done with the French Revolution and Napoleon, that secured property rights. Okay, so that was very important. You could not expropriate. Even when Louis the 18th came back, you had a coming back of royalty in France in 1915, where Napoleon was defeated. They never went back on the expropriation thing. It was always maintained. Your property rights were protected after Napoleon. That remained even after Napoleon. That was crucial. You could not have innovation without protection of property rights. And creative destruction, very important. In China, if you innovated, you would threaten political powers. They would try to stop you. Okay. In Europe, you could always go to another country, and so the fact that you had competing countries in Europe would make creative destruction much easier, because you could always flee to a neighboring country if you start having problems in your own country.
There's another advantage of immigration and emigration.
Of course, absolutely.
You can use the access.
Yeah,
There's always
exactly.
the exit
You
as
can
well.
vote with
That's
your
the
feet.
voice.
You can vote with your feet. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I think the political aspect of it is interesting because I want to share something from Turkey actually. So, I mean, if a country, for example, has experienced like a long time of military coups or problems, economic downturns, etc., people were really trying not to change the system. They were trying to just protect maybe their income, that stability, and then that's why I don't know like what percent of the society. Or the people like were engaging in entrepreneurial activities, but there was some kind of a thing like just get a government job in the public sector and get a stable income and just continue with it. So it's
In France, you had a lot of that too. I mean, many people wanted to be civil servants. We have these grandes écoles in France, like Polytechnique, and most people out of Polytechnique wanted to be either head of existing large firms or, government officials. And now, more increasingly, they want to be startuppers, to have startups. So that's a kind of a positive evolution.
And how about like current countries? Like, I mean, I remember that in very poor countries, you can observe that entrepreneurial activities are also really high. People try to in a sense like buy and sell goods, maybe have a store if they maybe have another branch or something. But why do we not observe that and when you look at the advanced economies, like you observe really high innovative activities, but what's happening in the middle and why do we like what it feels like there is some stagnation there.
So that's a bit, you're asking about the middle income trap issue. So it's true that what happens that sometimes you may have a lot of entrepreneurship of some kind in very poor countries, and one barrier to growing is a lack of access to credit, of course. That can be a big issue that limits the extent to which you can become innovative. But also the other thing is that we've seen countries growing fast, catching up. Yeah, there are several ways of growing. One way is to imitate more advanced technologies and adapt them. Okay, and there is so much you can do there. But at some point, when you get sufficiently close to the technological frontier, you need to become really frontier innovators. And to be frontier innovators, you need different kind of institutions from where you are just imitators. You see, for example, when you are frontier innovator, competition is important because competition pushes firms at the frontier to innovate, to escape competitors, to escape rivals. The other thing that changes. Higher education becomes much more important when you are frontier innovator. When you are not frontier innovator, you could do with good primary, secondary, maybe undergrad. You don't need graduate school so much. You need much more graduate schools when you become frontier innovator. Financial systems. Bank finance is okay when you are imitating. If you want to go beyond, venture capital is important. Equity markets are important. So there are some countries that fail to make the transition to change their institution at the time where they should. Okay, you have countries that grew fast through imitation, but then at some point they have to change their institutions. But the problem is that for example, take a country like Korea, okay, or Japan. Japan is not middle income, but still the same syndrome. They grew very fast after the World War II because they caught up with more advanced technologies. Okay, but during that phase, you had large firms that grew up. The large conglomerates. They are called the chaebols in Korea, they are called the keiretsus in Japan. And not only did these large firms inhibit entry of small firms, which is not good for frontier growth, but also they put pressure on governments to not move to more competition because they don't want competition. You see? So the competition is exactly what you need when you want to foster frontier innovation. But that's exactly what these large firms do not want, because they don't want to be challenged by other firms. And so and so then you may fall into a middle income trap where these large firms have become so powerful that they stall the necessary transition to institutions that are conducive of frontier innovation. And then you get the middle income trap.
Is there a country that you would, I don't know, give an example, like this is a good example of, coming out of middle income trap, or, in terms of innovations?
Well, China, the problem is I thought China had a good chance, but now they may fall into the middle income trap, because China had this openness period, with Deng Xiaoping since the early 80s. And they managed to become much more innovative than many people thought, actually. And they are more innovative than in many areas. But it's true that now they are going through a period of closing down a bit. You see what I mean? Of a period of, how would I call that? Of being more secluded from the rest of the world. And, it's not good when you go after Alibaba, when you go after people who have grown fast. I mean, you discourage other people to become Alibabas. You see what I mean? So that's not great. And also the way they managed COVID. They didn't want to buy Western vaccines. They could have got out of the COVID thing much earlier. All this contributed to, investment is discouraged in China these days. So there is the fear that China these days could fall into a middle income trap.
So how about I really like those types of topics, like lost talent, Einstein's or Marie Curie's, because we observe that, for instance, if you look at inventors, top 1%, if from the in terms of family income, they're more likely to become, entrepreneurs or inventors. Even if you look at like the 19th century, this is the case. So I mean, what are your suggestions, or what are your opinions on, uncovering those lost talents? Because there is a huge, when you think about inequality, income inequality, or in terms of socioeconomic or racial inequalities or racism, there are so many things going on.
So my view there is that, I am having rich people is not a problem for me. I mean, there are people who are obsessed by having rich people. I think it's very bad. I think that, it depends why you become rich. If you become rich because you do a big innovation, why not? What's important for me is that the rich don't use their wealth to buy out, to prevent entry of new innovators, exactly like the Chaubol's, the syndrome that I described previously. You see, so that I don't mind having rich people, as long as you make sure that they don't use their wealth to bias the political system or to prevent entry of new innovators and things like that. But what I worry for me, it's very important to have social mobility, to have no matter your family background. If you are talented, you should have the same access to education, aspirations, innovation. I think that's very important. There are many smart kids, and just because they didn't grow up in the right environment, they could have become innovators, and they are not innovators. And that, I think, is a huge loss for society, for growth, for welfare, for everything. And I think it's very important, and it's been work, John has done work, I've done work on Finland, and Ufuk Aksigit, I know you had Ufuk here, has done very interesting work on Denmark, showing that, in fact, the primary input for innovation, before R&D subsidies, it is education. You need to have a good education system. That's paramount, more than ever. With AI, particularly, you want to adapt to any new revolution like AI. If you have a non-educated population, you're done. You are doomed. You lose the game. So it's very important to have good education, high quality, accessible to all. I think that's very important. Good PISA tests, good test scores, very important. That, I think, is the basis. You can't have truly an innovative society without having a good education system. It's true the US is very innovative, but they also manage to attract many innovators from abroad. So they do that through migration. Yeah. But for our kind of country, I think, but they lose a lot. They have still a lot of lost Einsteins in their country. I mean, it's a pity. They could do much more there. I think it's a good education system, that I think is paramount. It's a paramount input.
Yeah. And so if you, I mean, well, I'm gonna mix some of the questions that I had in the cheesy questions part. But I mean, if you had a power, like, or if economics was kind of like a magic power, like, what would it fix right now? Like, what is the biggest problem that we are facing in your in your opinion?
A big problem is climate. Of course, climate change is a huge deal. So we want to make sure that we can have green and inclusive growth. That's what we would like. So,
I mean,
so how can we make growth inclusive and green? And but innovation is the way. I mean, but good. But we have to direct innovation in a direction which is good. You see what I mean? Innovation is not automatically green. The work I've done with John, in particular, and other co-authors, shows that in the automotive industry, we looked at in our GPE paper 2016, large car companies, that have innovated in combustion engines in the past, continue to innovate in combustion engines. They don't go much to electric cars. They go some, but not enough. And so spontaneously, innovation is not green. So you need government and civil society to direct firms' innovation towards greener innovation. So carbon tax is one way, subsidies to green innovation is one way, green industrial policy, we could talk about that, is one way. And consumers also have a lot of power. In recent work I've done with Roland Benabou, Alexandra Roulet, and Ralph Martin, we show that, in countries where consumers are very pro-environment, firms tend to innovate greener. So they also play a big role. But you see, that's very important. You need the state and civil society to be there to direct firms' innovation towards greener. But also you need them to make sure that education, that inclusiveness will be there. You see that firms will behave correctly, when it comes to labor contracts, to labor relationship, and all that. So that's and then the idea of this triangle. It's an idea that I mentioned in my book, but it's an idea that, for example, Sam Bowles and Wendy Carlin have made a lot about. You see that you need firms are the one that innovate, but you need the state. Competition policy, regulation, that carbon tax, that's the state. But you need civil society to check that the state is not being captured by incumbent firms, you see. That's why this triangle is crucial, because the firms innovate, the state in principle could direct firms but you need civil society, because first to make sure that the state is not being captured by existing firms. So this triangle comes very naturally. If you have the Schumpeterian view contradiction that I mentioned at the beginning, a way out is to have that triangle very active.
Okay, so I mean, you probably meet with a lot of people from politics and who want policymakers. But how do we, if there because there are problems with the market economy too. So how are what are the things that we can do to probably fix those problems in the market economy?
First, the market economy, at some point, I believe in my youth, in that the centrally planned economy would be fine. We know that it's not good for innovation. I mean, because first you don't have any innovation incentives. There was only one area where Soviet Union was innovative, was defense, because that's the only area where they face competition, military competition. But otherwise, they would not be very innovative. So market economy is the best system to deliver innovation, to push innovation. Apart from the fact this, yeah, exactly. And also I believe in it because freedom is important to me, because all the socialist experience, the centrally planned, ended up, being bloody and anti-freedom and etc. So I believe in a market system. The question is, I want it to be both innovative and inclusive. In the US, it is very innovative because they have a very good ecosystem of innovation. Basic research is very well funded in the US, well funded and organized universities. Then you have the NIH, the NSF, this research organization. Then you have private donors organization like the Howard Hughes Medical Investigator that bet on good talents. So they have a whole ecosystem for basic innovation in the US. Then they have a venture capital, to help startups. Okay. Then they have institutional investors. Again, I did work with John. I advertised my work with John here, and with Gisingales, where we showed the importance of institutional investors to push innovation in large firms. And they have things like the DARPA, Defense Advanced Project Agency. They have this thing that push that very smart industrial policy, which is pro-competition industrial policy. I don't want to get into the detail. That push in space and defense, it was the DARPA. For biotech, it was the BARDA, the Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority. They have these things as well, which is a good way to do industrial policy, to elicit projects and move on things where you need to achieve a mission in 2 years and you have to coordinate agents and resources. Then DARPA or BARDA, we had to produce a vaccine in 1 year. BARDA is very suited, or we need to put a man in space in 2 years. DARPA was very adapted to that. So they have the basic research, startups, institutional investors, and the DARPA, BARDA. That whole ecosystem is a fantastic ecosystem of innovation in the US. But the social model is very bad. I mean, when you get unemployed, when you are poor, it's miserable. You see, it's even during COVID, the poor really suffered too much. People who lost their employment, who lost their jobs, they fell into poverty, many of them. They lost health insurance, some of them. That's not what you want. On the other hand, in Europe, you could say we are more inclusive and protective, but less innovative. And some people believe that it's either or. You have to choose either to be more innovative or to be more inclusive. I think you can be both. And I will give you 3 types of policies that make you both more innovative and more inclusive. Okay. One is education, because you reduce the number of lost Einsteins. So you become more inclusive because more people can become innovator and more innovative. That's one, an obvious. Okay. Another one is competition. Now I told you about in the US you had this decline in productivity growth because the large firms inhibited entry by new innovators. If you reform competition policy, that allows new entry but we know also that new entry, it's good for creative destruction, and creative destruction has this virtue of being good for social mobility. I've done work with Richard Blondell and other co-authors where we show that social mobility is boosted by creative destruction. Why? Because creative destruction means exactly that you have people who are not that rich become rich and replace other people that were rich. I mean, creative destruction is a big engine of social mobility. So if you have a more competitive policy, you are both more innovative and more inclusive in the sense of having more social mobility. So that's the second one. And the third one is good labor market policies. In Denmark, they have a very good system. When you lose your job, for 2 years, you get 90% of your salary, and the state helps you find a new job. I think that's good for innovation because it makes creative destruction work very well, but also protects people. When you lose your job in Denmark, there is no negative effect on health. That's what my colleague Alexandra Roulet showed, whereas there is a huge negative effect on health in the US, as Deaton and Case have shown. So I think that you can become more inclusive and more innovative, and that's the kind of society that I hope we will converge to.
Yeah. And I think I found maybe a potential headline for the episode, like more inclusive and more innovative. I think it's a nice motto. Okay. Okay, this question I asked AI, okay, the ChatGPT, like what would you ask like Philippe Aghion? Like funny questions though, if you wanted to, ask him. And ChatGPT wrote, if you were to host an economics themed dinner party, who or which economists from the past would you invite and why?
But Marx and Schumpeter, of course, these two, obviously.
Yeah, I think it was a bit obvious.
Yes, that's an easy one. The two of them.
Yeah. And there was another question that AI generated, and that was funny. But I just want to share this. We don't have to answer this question. If economics were a flavor of ice cream, what would it taste like and why?
Oh, wow. Alors, you see, I will tell you something, but my answer to that is that very often economics is called the dismal science. And I'm more of an optimist. I'm more chocolate than most people would be. They would tell you acid lemon, and I might mix lemon with some chocolate. Yeah, I'm more chocolate than most because I'm more on the optimistic. But I am a kind of I'm not a Panglossian optimist, a Voltairean optimist. It's not someone I think automatically things will go well. I think that once you know about what goes wrong, you can mobilize forces to fight. You see, when you know competition was the problem for the decline in productivity growth, you can act upon it. I don't say that automatically. So it's more the optimism of the fighter. You see what I mean? But once I know problem recognized or problem osmolar solved, because you can mobilize the forces to try and solve the problem. So I'm this kind of optimist. The optimist of the fighter, not the optimist of just the passive optimism. It's active optimism.
So there is something that I also want to ask. So, I mean, if you look at the economics, I mean, in general, like as a discipline, so it seems like we're very much interested in the causal analysis. And sometimes I feel like when we're so much concentrated on causality, we might, I don't know, I feel like maybe the young researchers, I'm going to talk about the young researchers, we're losing.
There is too much people are focused on identification and causality, which is good, but then they focus on problems where, sometimes I believe you have to be more open-minded, because some people believe that if you don't do something else than a random control trial, you are wasting your time. I think it's a very narrow-minded way of thinking. I think in economics, it's a dialogue between theory and empirics. You go back and forth. But when you do the empirics, it can be, correlation. Some correlations can be very telling. You see, you learn from them. You have to be just honest what you are doing. Correlations, testing predictions, simulating models or calibrating models, and you can do also control experiments or things like that. But I think one should not be. There are some people who believe that if you do anything else than a structural model test, you are wasting your time. Some people believe that you do anything else than a random control trial, you are wasting your time. I think it's a very narrow-minded way of thinking. I think there are many things. I think it's never one way to make sure. You do various bits. If the bits, even if they agree more or less, they are after something. You see what I mean? And so my way is to I believe in the dialogue between modeling and empirics, but the way I engage in this dialogue, I'm very open on the kind of empirics that I do.
Yeah, I agree, and because sometimes I'm thinking like, how did Karl Marx be a Karl Marx?
Yeah, if he had just concentrated on identification, he would never have had a big idea.
Yeah,
and that's why find the people who do trials. Where is the big idea? Where is it?
Yeah.
You see what I mean? So I think we need both. It's important.
So one last question then. So I didn't ask what you're currently working on. So maybe we can just wrap it up with your current research and how your research agenda is, and maybe you can tell the young researchers as well, like what kind of areas that they can focus on, those kinds of things.
So in fact, I'm currently working a lot on green innovation. So I have various projects. One of them, one is with John and Martin Derrida, where we looked at the role of finance in energy transition, where we showed that credit constraints tend to slow down energy transition. Because in fact it relies a lot. I told you before about this path dependence problem, that firms that innovated a lot in dirty technology in the past continue to innovate a lot in dirty. I mean that the young firms don't have that problem, but the young firms are those that face mostly credit constraints. So when you have credit crunch, you hit mostly the young firms that are less prone to have this path dependence problem, and therefore as a result you slow down transition. So the relationship between finance and the speed of energy transition, I think it's a very interesting question. I work also on green industrial policies. So when you are on a value chain, you have inputs. Maybe an electric car has many dirty inputs. How you make sure that all the stages will become green. You see, there industrial policy becomes important. That's work I do with David Emus and Ernest Liu. Another one I'm doing is that when as people become richer, they go for quality rather than quantity. And that's very interesting, because quality is very much generated with services, and services pollute much less than manufacturing. So as societies get richer, there is a bigger demand of consumers for things that are really produced with services and that are less polluting. And that's work I'm doing with Timo Boppard, Fabrizio Zilbotti, Michael Peters. And so that's very interesting, because the degrowth people, there are people who said degrowth. Here it's a very different, it's interesting, because we can enroll them. We say, well, in a sense you are right, because it's true, there is always growth, but we go increasingly into quality growth. And quality growth is less well measured than the quantity growth. You see what I mean? So in fact, it's exactly we're doing what you said, but there is growth. Except that it's a quality, it's growth more in the quality dimension, which is the hardest to measure. And so it's true that GDP does not quite well capture this quality dimension, which is very much driven by services, you see. So there I'm very excited by that, because I think that there is hope for the future as societies will get richer. In the same way as demographic transition, at some moment you start having less children, and that will stabilize demography. In the same way, I think that that's a good force to induce quality-based growth, which is both less well measured and also less polluting.
So thank you very much, Philippe, for being our. It was a great conversation. It was great to have this chat with you. So if our audience would like to reach out to us, you can email us through at lsepodcast@gmail.com, or if you want to tweet, you can tweet us at _cast. Thank you very much again. Have a great day.
You're so welcome. It was a pleasure. It was a pleasure to exchange with you.
This is going to be probably the last episode of this first season. So we're going to finish it up with you, and then we will continue probably with others. So it was a nice finish up, hopefully. Thank you. Bye-bye.